Thank you, sir.
So I think DP Patnaik, Professor Patnaik is also with us. He has joined us.
I think we may begin the session.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir, you can
Yes,
start.
Professor Dattu.
Okay, thank you. It's my great honor and pleasure to introduce our first speakers, Radhika Punshi and David Jones. Radhika is the co-founder and managing director at the Talent Enterprise. And she's an organizational psychologist and HR expert. She advises clients on strategic human capital issues and challenges, including building the competitiveness of local talent, with a key focus on youth and female inclusion. She has an Ivy League education and 2 master's degrees in organizational behavior and psychology. Radhika is the first person from the Manasa region to be awarded a degree in positive psychology. She served on founding board of directors of several the prestigious International Positive Psychology Association, and is a visiting scholar at University of Pennsylvania. So welcome, Radhika. And we also have David Jones, who is the founder and CEO at the Talent Enterprise, with a background in labor market economics. David is a senior advisor to policymakers and organizational leaders on their most pressing human capital priorities. He has over 28 years of work experience, including living in Dubai for over 2 decades. David has worked with clients across 25 plus countries on a broad range of talent, leadership, assessment, performance, transformation, and inclusion projects. He's also experienced in using a wide variety of psychometric instruments and is qualified with the British Psychological Society at both level A and level B. So thank you very much for being with us today, both Radhika and David, and I'm looking forward to hearing your talk.
Thank you very much. Thank you for the introduction, and thank you to everybody from the Recce Centre and all the other partners for inviting us to participate in this event. I hope everybody's had a good lunch, but not too good. Because we are expecting some interaction from everybody. So we will obviously be focusing on our topic of the science of well-being, but we also want to make sure that we give you the opportunity to participate and to share some of your perspectives as well. We do have 45 minutes, so we want to move quite quickly. But nonetheless, if any of you do have questions or do have things you want to follow up with, then both Radhika and myself will be happy to take any questions. I think our contacts will be available, so if you wanted to send us an email or a WhatsApp, we'll be happy to continue the conversation later. I think you heard in the introduction, Radhika and myself are the co-founders of a company called the Talent Enterprise, and Radhika's background is very much from the organizational psychology perspective. She's very well qualified with 2 master's degrees, as you heard, one in positive psychology specifically, and she's studied in the US with Martin Seligman, amongst others. My background is quite different. So you could say that our background is complementary, or you can say that we have a lot of arguments. It depends which way you want to look at it. But my background is more from a labor market economics perspective. So I'm very interested in this topic of positive psychology generally, but from the positive aspect, or the other meaning of positive, which is about the objectivity or the measurement aspect. And from a well-being perspective, I'm very interested from a productivity perspective, and also from a connection with this thing called nudge theory, which you've probably heard of, about trying to affect people's behavior. We'll talk a little bit more about that. So we're really interested in not just what is the concept of well-being, but also how can we measure it, and how can we look for ways to enhance it. And really this is the focus of what we're going to cover going forward. Radhika, did you want to add anything more?
David, let's get into it. I think objective of our session was to give you an overview. It's a very, very important topic and a very large topic, and I don't think anyone can do justice to us in 45 minutes, but we do hope to give you an overview and end with some more practical advice, practical tips based on science around what we can also do to impact our own well-being. So we'll kind of split the session into 2 areas. One is to explore well-being in a bit more detail, and then to end with some recommendations in terms of things we can all start hopefully implementing in our lives, or with our students, or with the organizations we work with. So in terms of well-being, I mean, there's so much conversation about it. I'm sure this conference also you've been able to hear and be part of some of these discussions. Before we kind of go into the topic, if you all have your mobile phones with you, what I'll ask you to do is please take out your phones. And if you can either scan the QR code that's on the slide, or you can enter or log into www.menti.com and enter the code that's mentioned on the screen. I'll give you all a few minutes. I'll leave this on because it'll be good to get some of your views before we jump right into the topic. So if you can either scan the QR code on your phones, just hold it up in front of your screen and scan the code, or if you can log into menti.com with the code that's mentioned here, 1952 8560. I'll just give it a few minutes and I'm just going to toggle my screen to the Menti screen. Jan, okay, so now I'm on the Menti screen. The code's here on the top as well. So if anyone's just logged in, 19528560. We've got one person who's logged in. We'll give it a few more minutes to have a few more people join the session. And the first question we're asking all of you is, what does well-being mean to you?
So Radhika, we can see the slide screen, but we can't see Menti on.
Okay, thanks, David. I'll just reshare then.
Okay, I think it's...
Yeah, I'm just going to share my screen again. Okay, can everyone see this now? The Menti screen?
Yeah.
Okay, is anyone else logging in? Yeah, we've got two people. Menti.com, 19528560. Fitness of mind and body, being happy, mental, physical, and spiritual well-being, good space physically and emotionally, happy and healthy. Let's just wait for a few other responses. That's an interesting one, being content with what you have. Practical advice, eat, sleep, repeat. Wow.
Somebody's very fast.
Great, we've got 10 people logged in. We'll just give it another minute and I'll move on to the next question. Okay, let's move rhythm with nature. That's a beautiful statement. All right, next one.
Okay, somebody had a very good lunch. Pretty good, not quite so good, still good.
That's pretty high, actually, on average. We've been asking this question for the last 18 months, and I think the average has been about between 0.45 and 0.5. So it's great to see the people joining this call actually are much higher than the average we see. Great, 7.3. Excellent. All right, let's move on to the next question. It's always, yeah, from what we see again, it's been it's interesting. Again, this group seems I think we should be learning from all of you in terms of what you're doing for your well-being, because again, when we ask this question of all the different audiences we speak to, it's almost half and half between people who say it's got better and people who say it's got worse in the last 12 to 18 months. All right, last question. You can choose, I think, up to 3 responses here. So what's most important to you? Okay. One person's in, social and intellectual and emotional. So clearly it's physical, mental, emotional to some extent, and sort of equally split amongst some of the rest. All right, I think that's a good way to start. I'll just give it another minute, 20 seconds, in case someone else wants to share their views as well, and then we'll go back to the slides. All right, thank you for that. So what we're going to do now is cover these topics in a bit more detail as we go through the rest of the agenda today.
Yeah, and we'll keep coming back to some of the responses and the pattern of response that we had. So thank you very much to that. So our working definition of well-being is very similar, I think, to a lot of the themes that came up in your definitions, which is very much that it can be understood as feeling good and functioning well. And it's a combination of both of those, both from a mental and a physical perspective. So it's a feeling. But I think the debate seems to have moved on a lot from just merely being about happiness. So it sort of suggests that it's more rounded, it's more multidimensional, it's perhaps a sort of longer term or longer lasting type of feeling, whereas happiness can be something like seeing a butterfly and being able to look at it and enjoy its beauty for 5 seconds, 10 seconds, and then it flies away, or enjoying a flower that may come up in the garden, but maybe you know that that's going to not be there or it's going to be dead tomorrow. Well-being is a much more sort of rounded perspective with all these various different perspectives and dimensions to it. It also is about functioning well. So then I guess by implication, it's about trying to avoid dysfunctions in each of those aspects, right? So if it's about feeling healthy, physically healthy, then it's about trying to avoid those habits or those aspects of lifestyle which actually over time can promote ill health, as well as enhancing those positive aspects. So it's really a very sort of well-rounded, multi-dimensional, more longer-term type of feeling, and it's really designed to be, I think, much more longer-lasting or much more meaningful than just purely happiness. It's an emotion. Okay, I think you can see from reading the press or listening to the media or talking to your friends, I'm sure, that well-being matters a lot more now than ever before. In economics, we have this thing called the Easterlin Paradox, which shows that there's an inverse correlation between the GDP or the average wealth of a society and the average reported level of happiness. So whilst our generation maybe in India or in any country has probably got the highest levels of GDP than previous generations, more opportunities that are afforded to us, higher standards of living. On average, there's a relationship in all countries across the world that once you hit middle income in particular, then actually more people report more negative aspects of well-being, whether that's in this case conditions such as depression or anxiety, clinical conditions, and particularly we're seeing more and more of those, as you can see here, amongst young people. And I think this is why we're also very interested in things like digital well-being, because we see for younger generations in particular, particularly in the last 2 years, there's a feeling of isolation, there's a feeling of lack of physical connectivity, and maybe an over-reliance on some of the social media or some of the other aspects. There's this famous quote, I'm sure you've heard of it, that we have the saddest generation with the happiest photos at the moment. Yeah, and so similarly with students, we're also seeing those people who are in leadership positions are seeing higher levels of stress, of exhaustion. The workload has increased significantly over the past 12 months, having to continue to operate in the sort of restrictions that we've all been facing has extra challenges and maybe extra depleting for us. I think also because there's this merger or lack of barriers or division between home and work in the way that it used to be. Most people are reporting it's much harder to switch off, feel like they are having trouble sleeping or relaxing, in the way that they used to when work mostly took place in a different physical location. So this is also something which is very important. And also we're seeing that more managers are now having an expectation that they're going to talk with their team, and also in the academic field that more teachers are expected to talk to their students and vice versa about things like well-being. And many people are saying actually they don't feel comfortable in doing that. That there's this sort of formality or there's this evaluation which they feel is taking place. So there's still this feeling that if you talk about particularly mental well-being issues, that there's a sort of embarrassment about that, or there's a feeling that this is sort of somehow admitting some weakness, even though probably as human beings at times we all have these feelings, right? It's a very universal type of approach. So this is some interesting aspects of this, but generally I think what we're seeing is that both in the workplace and in the academic field, we're seeing that more and more people are reporting that well-being is becoming more and more of a priority. So this is a tool that we use at the Talent Enterprise. It's a well-being assessment called Element X. And as you can see here, we have 9 different dimensions to this, talking about some of the things that you mentioned, but also that we think is important. So each of those 9 dimensions has sub-dimensions. So for instance, in terms of digital well-being, we talk about being able to switch off. We talk about getting the right digital balance, remote working, and how you can structure that. Then there's also workplace well-being, things like relationships, mental well-being, emotional well-being, particularly how aware are you and self-aware of your emotional state. Everybody experiences both the positive and the more destructive emotions, and Radhika's going to talk a little bit more about those at different times, but not all of us recognize them to the same degree, and not all of us have the same level of self-awareness about what does that mean for ourselves, our self-regulation, and also how we relate to other people. For me, I'm also very interested in digital well-being. I think I'm very interested in the sort of practical applications through things like nudge theory, about how we can have virtual cycles of trying to encourage people at the right time to adopt more of the positive behaviors. But I also think there's a danger with a lot of social media platforms that they are actually designed in their fundamental architecture to have a negative nudge theory, in the sense that they are designed for us to be manipulated and to feel that there's something that we need, that an advertiser or a product company or some other commercial organization can satisfy for us. So I think these aspects are very interesting.
And Samdu, just to your question around, the business of well-being, it's like the business of happiness, right? A lot of what happens when times like this, it's become trendy. You just have to look at everything on social media or LinkedIn, and everyone's talking about well-being or resilience. And again, the risk with these things is that the commercial and the business aspects, the self-help takes over the science, and there is so much kind of bad research and kind of bad advice also being spread at the moment around well-being. So I think as, all of us in the academic community or a community that's interested in these areas really constantly has to kind of separate sort of the science from the self-help and talk about actual strategies that work, because there's always a danger that, you can very quickly move into a commercialization or business of this issue as with many, many other issues as well. So David's going to kind of talked a little bit about why it's important, why it's more important today more than ever before. And what I'm going to talk about is, and I think this is stuff you might all be familiar with, why is focusing on well-being hard work, right? It's not easy. We can all say we want to do it, but we know it's hard to form habits. It's hard for us to kind of focus on these aspects. It takes a lot of discipline. It takes a lot of focus, and you're probably all familiar with, I'm going to talk more about the emotional aspect now around well-being and how we're experiencing things at the moment. So if you sort of look at the 6 universal emotions, as you know, there are 4 of the 6 emotions, and this is universal across, all parts of the world. There are 4 emotions that are negative, 1 emotion that's sort of neutral, and there's only 1 positive emotion, that's happiness. So from a, it can be argued that from an evolutionary perspective, or from the way we're kind of made for sort of that fight or flight response. We're made to kind of react more to bad news or to things that are not going well. We're more primed for kind of the negative emotions as well. And there is a lot of research that says negative emotions tend to have a stronger potency. So they tend to be much more strong and much more long lasting than positive emotions. And if you sort of look at, thoughts and the thought emotional cycle as well, that there is kind of things out there that say we have about 45 to 60,000 thoughts a day. 80% of those thoughts end up being either negative, again, based on the primacy of emotions we feel. So it's a constant struggle for all of us almost every day to keep challenging those sort of thoughts coming to us, emotions that we feel, things that we experience, and kind of shift to the positive. So it's not something that's easy to do, as you would know from many things around sustaining well-being or sustaining levels of happiness. It takes a lot of work because we're constantly challenged by a lot of noise from outside around that. And I think COVID has exaggerated and accelerated how we feel, right? So I know most of us are feeling this heightened sense of just depletion. We're tired, we're exhausted, we're on calls, and everything is being done more virtually. There is a lack of physical connection because we're not with our friends or with our loved ones or with our colleagues as much. So when you're with someone, you can go for coffee and you can see if someone's feeling up or down. Those kind of cues that we get from physical interactions are much less as well. And if you look at the media, right? So, obviously in the last 10, 15 days, the Omicron sort of news has taken over and it creates this fear. So we're constantly having to deal with the sense of depletion, deal with the sense of uncertainty, but also then, have a lack of access because of social distancing to friends, families, colleagues as well. So it's a lot for us to take. So we really cannot, I think, more than ever before, take our well-being for granted or that of others. So we really have to take it upon us to check in, make sure we're okay, but also make sure that people around us are okay, and just kind of have permission to be human, right? I think me personally, I think in the last 12, 15 months, I've had more good days and more bad days than before. Some days I get up feeling great, some days I get up feeling not so good. And it's important to recognize that and not just deny or kind of feel like life's normal. So life has changed a little bit, and it's really important for us to recognize those cycles because, there is this heightened sense of depletion and emotionality most of us may have experienced earlier this year or continue to experience at the moment. David?
Yeah. So one of the key things we were talking about is about this self-awareness, right? So understanding how you may be feeling right now. And I think certainly speaking for myself, I wouldn't pretend to speak for Radhika, even though she's had a very significant birthday recently. I think as you get older, it's very important that you hopefully are gaining some wisdom and some greater self-awareness, but that you have this sense of awareness or this sense of focus on learning about yourself and learning about what works well, where you can be most productive, where you feel that you have the greatest sense of well-being. And some of the things that you see, like for instance, back to the element X dimensions, things like energy. Right? I think as you get older, and one of the things that happens in middle age is that the things that you used to be able to do when you were younger, like just stay up all night and just get it done, and just not worry too much about the sort of quality or the regularity of the food that you're eating, and you can stay up late and get up early the next day, no problem. These things actually become more challenging when you become older, right? So you have to then start to manage your energy, and this is one thing that's very resonant with me right now, right? That you have to really invest in that because it makes such a big difference when you're older. But you do have the benefits of having a greater sense of self-awareness. So this article I thought was very interesting, right, from Adam Grant in the New York Times. So there is actually a name for this feeling of that, not always having the energy, not always having the sense of purpose, not always having the sense of clarity, but in this case, in the article, talks about waking up and just sort of, I think it's called doom scrolling, right? Where you just sit there scrolling through various different posts or pictures and not necessarily having the sort of the sense of direction to be able to really say, okay, what is it that I need to do today? What is it that I need to focus on? So you are not necessarily feeling relaxed or that you're replenishing your energy, but you're also not necessarily having this sense of meaning or purpose in what you're doing. So languishing, I guess, is the opposite, if you like, of thriving. Okay, so that this feeling of not necessarily feeling burnt out, but feeling like there was a sense of lack of intensity in your feeling, feeling aimless, feeling like there's a void, something which is missing, but it's difficult to name it. And I think this is obviously related to, in many cases, personal experiences that many of us have had in terms of being infected with COVID or losing loved ones, having this sense of restriction and not being able to live the lives that we have expected or learned to expect, and then having this sense of drifting. Yeah. So I think this is a very important phenomenon, which I think is something which is becoming more frequently addressed.
Yeah, and when we sent this article to our team, I think about 90% of them said this is really meaningful. It's kind of what we're feeling now. So if you haven't read the article, do go through it. It's a good one to experience. As we go through the rest of the slides, do ask some questions in the chat so we can also try and respond to them as we go. So I think just the whole thing with languishing, right? So if you're in this state, it's okay if it's for a few days, it's okay if it's for a few weeks, but if it carries on for too long, I think what ends up happening, again, going back to sort of upward and downward spirals, is if you're in the state of languishing, you might just be carrying on with life. And again, it's okay to feel like that because, again, these times are a bit exceptional. But over time, what can happen is it can create these sort of downward spirals on the right? So you could start to feel a bit bored, you could feel impatient, you could feel frustrated, you'd start to maybe have self-doubt about where you're heading, start to build anxiety, there might be some level of guilt or insecurity. So what happens is managing this kind of state of just being or just feeling blah, because very quickly it can turn into something that's a little bit more potent, a little bit more concerning. So you can very quickly get into these downward spirals. And what we need to do as individuals, as teams, with our colleagues, with our friends, is try and create these upward spirals in our life. And it's much more important to do now than ever before, right? So very quickly, you could also move from a sense of languishing to feeling a bit more secure, feeling a bit more confident, a bit hopeful about the future. And I think a lot of you said your levels of well-being are 7.5, 7.7, which is great. So you're probably in that state of upward spirals. And what happens when you are feeling more positive emotions over time than negative emotions is you're more creative, you're more open-minded, you're in the state of flow, and you are definitely just a lot more energetic, a lot more productive. So for many of us who are in this sort of neutral or languishing phase, it's important to recognize if it's happening over a long period of time, and for ourselves and for our friends and our family, and try and create these shifts to create more and more upward spirals in our lives. So what we want to do for the rest of the discussion is, like I said, it's a really large topic and we can't really do justice to all of the science. And there's so many people on the call who I'm sure have already shared or will continue to share their views on what is well-being. But what we thought we'll do for the rest of the call is just talk about 4 or 5 practical tips that we can all take away, things that we can implement. These are things that I know have worked for me, they work for our team, they work for people we work with. So we thought we'd really spend the next 10 minutes just talking through things that we can all do. Again, research-based, science-based to improve well-being. And hopefully there's something from this that will kind of click with you as well. And do ask questions as you go. So this is the first one that I think is an important one. So, I know a lot of conversation and a lot of talk that we have, you might be having sort of as students, or you have, when you're starting your career or when you are kind of well into your careers, about finding that sense of passion, loving what you do, feeling engaged about your, studies or your work, or most importantly, it's about finding that purpose, right? And finding the purpose, being part of something that's bigger than your own, obviously has the longest lasting impact on someone's well-being and happiness. But one thing I've noticed, especially in the last 18 months, is it's also important to focus on momentary moments of happiness. So pleasure, which we sometimes say, we look down on it and say, okay, it's not that good or not that important, is really important, especially in times like this. So don't feel guilty about finding those short bursts of happiness, right? So whether it's a good meal, whether it's watching a good movie, whether it's reading a good book, especially in times like this, we also need to focus on things that give us, more momentary feelings of happiness, because we might be feeling sort of low. So don't feel guilty about the shorter kind of pathways to happiness, along with trying to find your passion and your purpose. And that's something that's been really important for me. So if you're kind of feeling a bit blah, feeling a bit lost, don't feel guilty about spending 2-3 hours, watching a good movie or focusing on a good book, because that also helps you create that sort of positive spiral.
I think just what Radhika was saying, I think some of the experience over the last 2 years is about managing your expectations, right? I think saying that the secret to happiness is having low expectations, right? But I think if you manage your expectations, that maybe you're not going to be able to spend as much time with your loved ones or your friends as much as you have been able to in the past. But when you do, you can really cherish that, right? You can really savor that time. You can make it a new memory. You can think about all those great feelings and experiences that you had together. And I think it's really important then also to think about how you can make sure you're squeezing all the juice out of those aspects there are, and also think that, okay, if everything was free and open, then maybe also I'd be wasting time traveling, stuck in traffic jams, stuck at airports, doing daily commutes, which maybe are frustrating. So maybe there's some also compensatory benefits from those types of restrictions.
Sorry, I couldn't seem to unmute myself. And I think the important thing here is to not put pressure on yourself, because, when you talk to people about how they're feeling, some people say, oh, I feel amazing. I feel like I found myself in the last 18 months. I've had more time with family, but some people say I feel really lost. So we're all on our own journeys, and whatever we can do to increase and sustain our own happiness at this moment is fine. So don't feel that pressure that you have to find sort of your purpose and your meaning right away. You can continue to just focus on feeling better than you are. The other thing that's really important is recognizing and managing emotions. So there's a lot of work in neuroscience. Many times we're on these calls and someone says, how are you doing? And we'll say, we're good, we're happy, we're okay. And I think it's important to call out and say when you're not okay or when you're not happy. But I think more importantly, what we're starting to find is that naming the emotion that you're feeling, not just the broad sort of I'm happy, I'm sad, I'm angry, but really saying, why are you happy? Are you happy because, you're feeling relieved about something? Are you thankful? Are you feeling inspired? Or if you're feeling not good, is it because you're feeling disappointed or you're feeling dejected? So really trying to go much deeper into how you're feeling is a very important aspect of managing and sustaining your well-being, because also from a neuroscience perspective, your brain can predict and can start to prepare actions for how you're feeling. So whether it's for you, whether it's for sort of relationships or, people you're talking to, try and go beyond or, below that sort of high level feeling to really say, okay, I'm feeling sad. It's because I'm feeling guilty. I'm feeling guilty because I haven't done this. Maybe I need to challenge some of those beliefs and behaviors. So try and stay with your emotions, try and kind of explore them a little bit more. And I think that's a really good way to manage some of the emotions you might be feeling. So a lot of work being going on. Again, we're just giving you some high level tips today. There's a lot more that we could discuss just around each of these areas. The third area, which again I find really useful, is about locus of control. So these are again things you might know of, but again at times like this, there's so much happening. There are many things that are outside our area of control, outside our area of influence. So, really, when you are kind of facing a huge challenge or you're facing something that you really feel you can't get over, sit and write down things that you can control, right? So your attitude, your effort, the choices you make, the things you say to other people, how you spend your time. So these are things you can directly control that can have a big impact on how you feel and what you feel. But there are things that you cannot control. And it's really important to identify those when you're in a situation when you're feeling really stuck. And again, I try and do this many, many times when, and it's not just for sorts of regular stress, but when you're actually going through a huge setback or challenge in your life, it really helps me to think back and say, okay, these are things I just cannot do anything about. And these are things I can try and influence or control a little bit more. So I think, again, a very, very important thing for you to think about is things you can control and things you possibly cannot, and then manage how you do both in some way or the other. The other one David talked about a lot is using existing technologies we have to create those behavioral shifts. And you can do this in your homes, you can do this in the office, you can do this back at university. So, on the left is obviously a good example of just a subtle way of using nudge theory. So obviously focusing on things like, using the stairs versus using the elevator. We all have access to some level of data from our phones, from our wearables, around kind of the physical activity we're doing. So use this information that you're getting from the environment to create those shifts about how much you're exercising or how well you're sleeping or what you're eating. And if you all use Gmail, I found this in the last 2-3 weeks quite interesting. So about 3 weeks ago, this screen on the right started popping up on my calendar, talking about how much time I'm spending in meetings versus how much time I'm spending in one-on-one time. And basically it was showing I was spending about 28 to 30 hours in meetings every week, which obviously meant in a 40-hour week, I'd have only 10 hours in my entire week to do my own work and to kind of manage my own priorities, which obviously meant I was working late nights, I was working early mornings. And small examples of just having this information available to me has helped me shift how many meetings I try and have in a week and trying to say more no to meetings than before. So there are already a lot of tools and technologies available to us. There are things we can start to do to really shift, again, those behaviors in our physical, how we spend our time and our well-being as well. So that's another important thing that I'm starting to see has huge benefit. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is it really starts with you. So it's probably been a long time that most of you have been on a flight. I was on a flight to Saudi after about 2 years, actually. And it's interesting, right? When you get onto a plane, they always say, put on your own mask first before you help others. And I always thought that's strange, right? So if I have my 6-year-old daughter sitting next to me or my family sitting next to me, I would always obviously reach out and try and make sure they're okay before I'm okay. And what I've really started to realize is we all need to have our own masks. We all need to make sure we're feeling good, we're functioning well, because if we ourselves are not able to cope, we ourselves are not able to manage, what's happening in life, very, very rarely can we help other people. So the middle picture is my daughter, she's 6 years old, and I've realized I cannot be a good mom, I can't be a good daughter, daughter-in-law, wife. On the right is our team. I can't be a good leader if I'm not feeling good myself. I'll feel there are days when I'm not being able to make decisions, I'm not present with my daughter when I'm home, and it's because I feel like I'm kind of depleted. So the last thing we really say is focus on self-care. Make sure, you're focusing on things that you can do before you try and help anyone else. And it always says you can't pour from an empty cup, right? So that might mean setting more boundaries, spending more time alone, saying no a lot more than you say yes. So like I said, I've started saying a lot, more no to meetings that I would have said yes to in the past. So start to think about things you can do starting today or tomorrow to take care of yourselves. And that really is, I think, the first step towards focusing on your well-being. And we'll probably have 5 minutes for questions, but I'll just end with this thing about, after this call, hopefully if you have 5 minutes, write down one thing that you can start to do starting today to take a little bit more care of yourself, because if you don't do that, everything else we've talked about is, not going to be relevant at all. I'll stop here. David, if you have any closing thoughts, and then maybe we can open up for questions as well.
No, I think we had some questions on the chat. So I think if there's any other questions to add or anybody wants to verbalize them, then maybe we can spend the final 5 minutes just dealing with those.
Thank you, David and Radhika. I think there's a question on the chat. David, maybe you might want to feel that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. Yeah. Yeah. So I think it's interesting, right? So I think there is the Easterlin Paradox. I think is really measured at a societal level. So it's really looking at the overall GDP of the society, and then what the sort of group or representative sample of the group's responses are. So yes, individuals are obviously working within that structure. So I think it's important to recognize, I think, that financial well-being is one of the dimensions that we have in element X, but it doesn't necessarily always relate to an absolute level of wealth or financial well-being, right? I think there are many people that on an objective level have relatively little, but nonetheless are more likely to exhibit feelings of well-being. And in fact, in many cases, if you look at history and the history of civilizations, it's that point at which there's too much luxury or there's too much wealth available that actually those societies start to struggle with thriving or continuing. And I think really making the most of what you have, and also I think being able to recognize when you have enough is also really important. And I think that's important on an individual level. And then from an environmental aspect, obviously it's very important from a societal level that we're not always continually focused on just this very one-dimensional measure of success, which is economic growth or economic well-being alone. So I think it is a paradox, so it's very difficult to explain. There are many dimensions to it, but I think it's very much looking at it from a societal perspective and trying to make sure that, yes, of course, there's a basic level, but if there's an idea of relative wealth or perceived relative wealth, which I think is maybe enhanced or exacerbated by things like social media, where everybody's taking photos of themselves with, I don't know, their new TV or their new car or their new house or something. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're more happy, right? Because the paradox works in reverse. You have people with lots and lots of material wealth who are highly dissatisfied and have all these problems with depression and all that type of stuff. So it is a very interesting question. I think we all have to find our own answer to it, to be honest.
Great. Thank you, David. Let's see if you have any other questions on chat. Not that I can see, no. Yeah, so maybe we have, I don't know, half a minute. Oh, by the way, it was, the eat, sleep was, that was me.
Okay. Back to basics for sure.
Yeah, I've also understood one thing is to decide to do less. Yeah, and that's the least that I can do. So.
Thank you, David and Radhika. I just wanted to say that this concept of languishing is a very, very vital tool for all of us who work in this field. And it was beautifully elucidated by both of you. So, I mean, we'll definitely look forward to one of your presentations in our next semester, because this concept needs to be highlighted. We might explore with our students how to take it forward in terms of small experiments and all that we have been doing in the classes. Thank you.
Great, Pio. That would be wonderful.
All right. Thank you so much. Thank you, David. Thank you, Radhika. That was really, really great. You learned a lot. At least I learned a lot. And I'm sure that was very useful for all of our participants. Thank you so much. I assume that it's pretty late for you guys. So thank you for staying up.
Thank you so much. All the best, everyone. Stay well. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye.
So can we move to the next keynote? Shanko?
Yes, sir. We can move on. Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, so So now we have our keynote speaker number 8. It is a great pleasure for me to introduce Padma-Shri Professor Devi Prashanna Patnaik. And Professor Patnaik is amongst linguists very, very well known. We don't really have to introduce him, but for those of us who are not linguists, I would take this opportunity to introduce Padma-Shri Professor Devi Patnaik. He's a linguist, literature, educationist, and activist. Grew up in a Gandhian family in the smallest princely state of India, what was the princely state of India then, and had a diverse experience in his childhood. His father was externed from the state for working with Gandhi. He completed his graduation at Utpal Christian College in Cuttack by establishing a record in the university by being awarded the gold medal for securing highest marks among BA honors and MA students. He completed his post-graduation from Ravenshaw College in 1952, again securing the university gold medal. He moved to Cornell University in Ithaca, New York, and studied Odia language, literature, culture, linguistics, anthropology, law, and a 3-year diploma in French, and completed his PhD in 1961 with linguistics, anthropology, and applied linguistics as a minor. He wrote his thesis on comparative reconstruction of Oriya, Assamese, Bengali, Hindi, the first of its kind in Indo-Aryan studies. Professor Patnaik has been at the forefront of language-related activities in India for 3 decades. He was the founder director of the Central Institute of Indian Languages, CIL Mysore, until his retirement. The institute has become a major research center in India with regional centers in several states. Professor Patnaik was also the former chairman of Institute of Oriya Studies and Research in Bhubaneswar. He was awarded Padma Shri in 1987 for his contribution to formalize and adding Bodo language in the 8th schedule of the Constitution of India. He also took a major role in leading Oriya to acquire the status of a classical language. Some of his notable works include multilingualism in India, language education and culture, multilingualism, and mother tongue education, amongst others. Today, Padma Shri Professor Devi Prashanna Patnaik will speak on identity, language, social cohesion, and rhythm of life. So I welcome Professor Patnaik to deliver his keynote lecture.
Sir, you need to unmute your machine. You are on mute, sir.
So you need to unmute yourself. We can't hear.
Can hear.
Yeah.
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can hear you.
We can hear you now. Thank you.
Very good afternoon to everybody. Identity, language, social cohesion, and rhythm are interlinked. The word identity is a tricky word. Identity is expressed in terms of family, caste, community, language, religion, or region. It is also individual or group identity. With the changing times, development-related relocation of communities has changed the meaning of many of these identities. This also reflects the break of the rhythm of life. The changeover from an agrarian society to an industrial society, from a tribal society to a detribalized society, reflects the change in the rhythm of life. Similarly, changing from the mother language to dominant language also reflects change in the rhythm of life. Individual identity and social identity are dependent on cohesion. Individual as a member of a society and a society as a conglomeration of individuals illustrates this cohesion. In a multilingual and multicultural society, the question often asked is whether language is a divider or a connector. Whether diversity is an enemy of cohesion. It must, however, be recognized that discriminatory language policies lead to social exclusion of communities, creation of social division, and weakening of cohesion. Language is the expression of thought, feeling, imagination, and medium of communication, which made possible social organizations like family, community, society, state, and country. Language is the medium of culture, which is represented by oral and written literature, folklore and folk tradition, dance, drama, music, art, and architecture. Language mediates culture through sharing. Sharing is controlled by space and time, and thus the rhythm of life varies. Human endeavor to change the environment and to change the language used have posed unprecedented challenges before humanity. By privileging and developing language use through regulation and legislation, different geographical areas have disturbed social cohesion in different ways. Language, education, and social cohesion are intimately connected. Each one of them can be seen as promoting social harmony or leading to marginalization, discrimination, or social tension. Each one of them may also be seen as working towards lessening inequality and social depression through positive interaction among individuals and communities, and through inclusion and integration of people with the civil society. On the other hand, they can be used to enhance inequality and social tension. They end up in splitting identities and dividing families and communities. The Indian education system is a good example. The education system that Lord Macaulay designed for India had the goal that the few who would come out of this system would assist them in the management of the colony. They would be Indian by birth, but English in manners, morals, and value systems. Obviously, he didn't want to educate the Indians. He wanted to recreate a bureaucracy which would see India through their lenses. By declaring English as the only language of knowledge and development, he made Indians undermine their own languages. As English became the only language of life and living, it became the inevitable passport for government service and therefore the aspirational language for the future generations. English gave them a new identity and changed the rhythm of their lives. India became divided into two worlds, India and Pakistan, on the basis of religion. India has been divided into two nations, the English-speaking and the regional language-speaking India. This is a continuing process. The government English medium schools, the private regional language schools, the PPP, public-private partnership English medium schools are some of the examples of the directions in which we are moving. The closing down of village schools, lack of training of primary teachers in regional languages are some of the examples of our attitude towards the development of regional languages. These are also examples of the changing rhythm of life. The detribalization process which we are following are fraught with devastating consequences. You should understand that the total population of India, out of that 9% is tribal, and in a state like Odisha, the 23% of the population is tribal. Therefore, the tribalization process we are following are fraught with devastating consequences. Some 50 years ago, when I went to see a 90-year-old Santal lady who was dissuading the village children from going to school, I was surprised at her question. She asked, "School? Which school? The school which breaks our family, destroys our community? You want me to send my children to such school?" The school from which, after passing matriculation, he builds a house at Baripada, the district headquarters. After passing BA, he seeks a house at Bhubaneswar, state headquarters. You want me to send my children to such school? I had no answer to her question. Since then, I have asked the question to many educators of the state. I have got no satisfactory answer. In the name of development, we take the tribal children away from their family and village and detribalize them through our education. We are creating an aspirational aura which is outside their socio-cultural context. We are creating a false aspiration in order to justify detribalization as a policy. We have denied communal right over their land and forest. Any protest is suppressed. Our police and army who operate in areas do not know their language. My efforts at establishing a language school for our defense agency, civil and military, have resulted in utter failure. There has been no serious popular movement against these oppressive and suppressive actions. Our intellectuals who are trained to see our history and tradition through foreign lenses have lost their eyesight to perceive reality and lost their hearing to listen to the changing rhythm of life around them. Rhyme and rhythm are not confined to music and poetry, to sounds and words, to art and architecture, to work or leisure. They have become metaphors for life. Rhythm has become part of our existence. In ancient and medieval times, the world was viewed as the aggregate of discrete societies bound together by humanity, fraternity, mutuality, and complementarity. With the advent of world capitalism and global market, schisms in international politics, identities were defined as first, second, and the third world. The concepts resulting in culture, language, and human rights were transformed into conflict among languages, cultures, and individual rights. People of the world, in one sense, have come nearer. In another sense, they have become strangers to one another. The paradox of our age, as 14th Dalai Lama said, you know who Dalai Lama is and why he came down to India. He sent me a write-up which said, we have more degrees but less sense, more knowledge but less judgment, more experts but more problems, more medicine but less healthiness. We have been all the way to the moon and back, but have trouble crossing the street to meet the new neighbor. We build more computers to hold more information, to produce more copies than ever, but have less communication. We have become long on quantity, but short on quality. The paradox of our age is a call to look inwards and to take determined action to change ourselves, to achieve social cohesion. This is a call to fight cynicism. To be cynical is the worst enemy of mankind. Hope is the alternative of cynicism. Hope for a better world brings happiness. Hopelessness resulting from a conclusion that everything is bad, everyone is bad, nothing can be done to better things, leads to end of life. Real happiness comes out of the conviction that individual well-being is dependent on communal well-being and social inclusion. Therefore, we have had long discussion on well-being and happiness also. There are some reference to happiness, but I think that if we take an exhaustive view of all these factors, identity, language, social cohesion, and rhythm, then we probably would understand a little better the idea of happiness as well as well-being. Thank you all.
Thank you so much, Professor Patnaik. That was absolutely illuminating. I now invite our audience to ask questions if they have any. I will also look at the chat to see if, So if anyone has any questions, they can unmute themselves.
Yes, I would just like to make a comment because my association with Dr. D.P. Patnaik goes back more than 45 years. I remember interacting with him in my college days for the first time, and I think this relationship is now coming close to 45 years of association. What I wanted to share is that the relationship between language, community, and well-being is something which we had not really covered well. We had not reflected well in this conference, and even the invited papers did not address this particular gap. So we would really like to thank you for bringing these insights into the discussion and the interactions that we are having. What still troubles us, I know that you have been also trying for a very long time to bring about these changes, is the erosion of identities because of the so-called development and the flux of technology that we are going through. And being in a technology institute and also being aware of some of the things that are happening around, because ours is a technology institute in the center of underdevelopment. We live among many villages and all that. Is a sad realization that it is not, it is disturbing our identity to a very great extent and is not leading to any kind of social cohesion. Like you, I belong to the Odia community, and our pride in our language is something which is deeply, sadly missing, unlike some of the other languages. And that we probably in our generation understand a little, but our next generation doesn't understand it. And this language-related identity and its relation to well-being is something probably that needs more probing. So, sir, if you could just throw some light on this comment, the last comment about language, identity, and well-being from the perspective of the fact that many of our languages are threatened. Many of our children do not know our language. That would be very helpful.
You see, if children do not know our language, it's not the fault of the children, it is our fault. Because we do not teach our children our own language. But we do not tell them that language and creation of humankind are co-terminus. Without language, there would be no human being. Then, not only that, language is the medium of education. It is the medium through which we acquire and transmit knowledge. It is also it is a subject, but also medium of all subjects. Therefore, language is important as far as man. I don't use the word civilized, I use the word culture. As far as human culture is concerned. Therefore, language and culture are so intimately related that unless we teach our children our own language, they will never understand our tradition. In the world, so many civilizations have blown up like water bubbles and they have been destroyed. Indian culture has continued for 7,000 years with unbroken history, so that it is something different from the other cultures. Our attitude, our philosophical, logical background is both and. We all, you, I, and the whole universe. 5,000 years ago, the came a call called Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam. Let us have the whole world as an extended family. So our way of looking at the world is different from the Western point of view, which is individualistic, which is either or, either you or me. Therefore, the either or and both and are different, and one must understand the two and must see that how we can change I into we, and how we can make everything our instead of mine. This more emphasis on I. This is where language comes in, because it is very important that we understand the role of language in creating the world, in maintaining the world, and also in destroying the world. The way we are moving now, we are moving towards a total destruction. 2 days back, I met the vice chancellor of a university who was a computer man. I asked him one question. I said, sir, I have some doubts in my mind. We are now working with artificial intelligence. What happens to natural intelligence? How do we relate natural intelligence with artificial intelligence? How do we make sure that artificial intelligence doesn't take over, that like robots, which are servant and we were masters and they were servant, now they are masters and we are their servant. Similarly, are we looking for such a future? So that is how I see technology, that unless technology is for human development, humans are not meant for technology. And language is a very important role to play in this entire process of communication, sharing, give and take. And unless we can achieve that, I don't think we can move much further. Thank you for asking me questions.
Thank you very much, sir.
Okay, we have a question from Professor Mojesh Bhattacharya. Mojesh Babu, would you like to ask the question yourself, or should I go ahead and read it?
I express my regards, and I'm Mohidas Bhattacharya from Calcutta. Mohidas Bhattacharya from Calcutta, sir. Mohidas, my just query, not a question. One thing we are experiencing that the state and the minor linguistics communities are not at par within our power system. So how do they will establish to shape their language in our system? It is a really we are facing several crises in the language policies and etc.
You see, the first thing is making the distinction between majorities and minority. I consider it to be a great mistake while we prepare our constitution. Majority and minorities are there, will always be there. But making this as a distinction and use it for political purposes becomes a very difficult purpose. Now, since you are from West Bengal, I'll give you one example. At one time, West Bengal had English from Standard 3. And they started English from Standard 3. And at that time, I was telling that I started English from Standard 6. And I had no difficulty in going and doing research in England and America. So why should you start from Standard 3? Can we make a course which would reduce the time, but could teach as much as we are teaching now, between the 3 and 10? So then the West Bengal government appointed a committee. I went there and we had discussions, and they agreed that they should do this thing. But that report never saw the day of the light. That report was buried. In any case, again they went back to 3. So this is what is happening all over India. when I took over charge of the government of India, charge of languages in the government of India, I started the Central Institute of Indian Languages. At that time also, I put some pressure on our Central Institute of English. I said, let us prepare a course, a brief course for giving English, sufficient English to the taxi drivers, to the auto drivers, to the railway coolies. So they prepared a course, English 120. English within 120 hours. English for special purposes. So this was 120. Then I said, why don't you prepare a course which is the equivalent to standard 1 to 10, but reduce the time scale. There was great objection. But after sufficient pressure from the top, they were forced to prepare a course. Could you believe that that course took 3 years to prepare? They didn't want it to be prepared at all. After it was prepared, they sold it to an African country. So they got the benefit of our research, but we didn't know anything. By that time I had left, and still I continued to do research, as a result of which this was published in India, but 4,000 rupees a copy. Who can buy 4,000 a copy? Then that was no longer available, so now it seems it has been republished at 8,000 rupees a copy. So this is how things are moving in India. This is how what happens to language, education, and language and community relationship. We don't care for community relationships. Our democracy is shrinking. It is no longer democracy doesn't mean government of the people, by the people, for the people. It means government of the bureaucrats, government of the politicians, and the people are on the receiving end. That is why we decide language policy which detribalizes the tribal, which makes poor poorer because they do not find, they do not have sufficient education to find services, government services. So this is the kind of situation in which we are in. We can go on discussing this thing for a long time, but there is no point in discussing it anymore. I think I have given sufficient indication of what is the trouble with us at the present time. There is more pronouncement, less implementation.
Thank you, Professor Patnaik. We have one more question from Gokul Muttu. If you would like to unmute yourself and ask the question yourself, you could do that. Yeah.
Several minority languages like Maithili, Bundelkhandi, Awadhi, they have all lost their position because of Hindi being declared as a ruling language in the states like UP, Bihar, Madhya Pradesh. So is there a way to get those languages back?
You see, we have already made Maithili a language of the 8th century. That means it has become equal to Hindi. In Bhojpuri, we are doing several other things. But that's not the question. My question is, we had made English, now Australian English, Canadian English, American English, and British English. There is no one English. In our university, we teach all these 4 different kinds of English. And they also know that they are not one and the same. Can we make them one? If we cannot make them one, why are we worried about making Maithili, Bhojpuri, Magahi, Maratha, Awadhi? Without them, there is no Hindi. Hindi means these languages. We are only creating problems for ourselves by making them minorities and majorities. I think I wrote to the government of India I said all languages of India are national languages. Therefore, we did not go in search of a national language. We have one official language. But there is, as we have a central official language, there are state official languages. So we must find out how we can make a communication language possible. Therefore, we are discussing wrong things by raising wrong questions. Therefore, I don't think we should be too much worried about it because we have already made Maithili. Maithili has a separate state. It is a separate language. It is recognized as a separate language. Every day in India, if you look at it, it's a very interesting situation that is taking place. Languages are breaking, languages are uniting. There are two tribal languages. One was Kuvi, the other was Kui. Now, at 20 years back, they were one language. In the census, subsequently, they became two languages. And now, as we make and break languages, not only they make and break themselves, we make and break them. We make all these languages separate, different. We don't promote them. See, if Maithili or Bhojpuri want to write in their language, how can you stop them?
So can we form separate states? Like say, for example, the Maithili speaking people as a separate state, so that state can have Maithili as the state language.
No, you don't have to make separate states. No state in India today has only one language. Each state is multilingual. Therefore, why should we make each state, for each language, one state? That is a wrong question to ask. See, this is the kind of question that they asked at the time of the debate in the Constituent Assembly, Indian Constituent Assembly. Because they do not understand what is language. See, there is a local language. And at the local level, there are also several languages. Then you go, becomes a regional language. At the region, there are several languages. Then you go state level. At the state, there are several languages. National level, there are several languages. If you make everyone a separate state, then there will be no country, there will be no state, there will be nothing. Therefore, I think it is a wrong question to ask. We should now ask how to integrate things, how to include, not how to exclude. Now, we are talking more about exclusion today rather than inclusion. That is one of the problems of present day world.
May I ask a question?
Yes.
Yes, thank you, sir, for the illuminating talk. I just wanted to know, what about those languages which are endangered by the existence of languages such as Bangla and Odia itself? There are tons of languages which have lost their identity. We are talking about language and identity. Their identities are endangered today for the very existence of Bangla and Odia. And just to say this, don't you think that it would be a wrong approach not to identify problems if we want to resolve them? Since the issue is linguistic identity, how can we not discern and respectfully identify languages based as minority or majority in this category? It's like leaving a disease undiagnosed. Would leaving a disease undiagnosed solve the problem, cure the problem? I don't think so. So how would you highlight on these 2 points? One, why is it so wrong to categorize languages according to these paradigms, since there is a very long historical reason why the situation is, the multilingual situation in our country is like the way it is today? And secondly, what about those languages? Because under no definitely can Bangla or Odia or Assamese be considered as minority languages. They are extremely popular languages with populations, native speaking population being somewhere between 5 million to 50 million. All of them are international languages. They have international presence. University of London, SOAS teaches literature in Bangla, Odia, Assamese, all these languages. They are not minority languages at all. How many courses on Mech literature or Kokboro or Kokboro is taught in SOAS? What about the folk tales of Santali? That's also.
Hey, but you see, I think it is not because of the existence of languages or other languages separately. It is because we create discriminatory laws or discriminatory rules which are imposed on people, so that is why problems arise.
Precisely, sir. Absolutely right, sir. That is exactly what my professor Mohidal Bhattacharya was also saying. When the system is discriminatory by definition, how do we redress the problem? It is a long-standing problem, sir. Our country is so rich, not only as a culture, but as language, and language is very much a part of our culture. We have been multilingual and diverse since time immemorial. We have been described by others as the ethnological museum of the world.
Yes.
Where the guiding definition was unity in diversity. Don't you think that if we ignore diversity for the sake of integration, we actually lose a very essence, the very fabric of what defines us as Indian?
Yes, I entirely agree. But my point is, why should we think? I'll give you one example of resolving such problems. Several years ago, there is a community in India called the Sindhi community. They do not have a state of their own. They live in different parts of the country, but mostly in Maharashtra. There was a controversy among themselves that it was being written in two scripts. It was written in Devanagari, it was written in Arabic, Urdu, Perso-Arabic script. So there was this quarrel going on between themselves. When I took over charge of India, we gave 1 crore of rupees to each of the states to start creating books through their languages, university level books. So there they started quarreling, although they were not a state, we gave them also 1 crore of rupees. But then they started quarreling, as a result of which they couldn't publish a single book. So they went on a delegation to the government of India. The government of India said, go and meet Patnaik. So they came to me. I said, what is your problem? Our problem is we cannot decide whether to print in Arabic script or in Devanagari script. I said, who can decide? I said, look, as far as I know, it is a generational problem. The older generation prefers to read books in Urdu script. The younger generation prefers to read books in Devanagari script. So you decide which one you want to use. They said, we cannot decide, we want to produce in both the scripts. I said, all right, I permit you to produce in both the scripts for 1 year. You produce in both the scripts, and whichever you finally accept, you come back and tell me, then we will decide what to do next. At the end of the year, they came back, they said, sir, we have decided to publish books in the Devanagari. I said, why? They said, we published in both the scripts, but the Urdu script, very few were sold, the rest of them were sold in the Devanagari script. So I said, that why do you quarrel about this? You settle down. So that is how it was resolved. I didn't make a decision, the decision was made by them. The same thing happened in case of Bodo. When the Bodo movement threatened the whole of northeastern India, the Prime Minister asked me to go and find a solution. So I went, found a solution which was accepted by the government, which was accepted by the Bodos, and that is how Bodo became a part of the 8th schedule. I have been arguing with the government of India, remove the 8th schedule from the constitution. I don't think 8th schedule serves any purpose other than making distinctions like majorities and minority, other than making distinctions like big and small. Therefore, remove it. It doesn't serve any purpose, it creates only controversy. But because it was originally there were 14 languages, now there are 22 languages in the 8th schedule. I said, give a list of languages that are found in the census or linguistic survey of India or any survey. Give all the list a list of names of languages. Do not use it as a status marker, that anything that gets into the 8th schedule gets a status. The rest of them have no status. I said that is wrong. Therefore, remove it from the 8th schedule. I have not been pursuing for the 50 years I have been fighting for it, because our intellectuals and politicians find it easy to fight among themselves and take advantage of that. Therefore, you are saying how we can find a solution. You cannot find a solution by leaving the people. Go to the people. Take them along with you. Then only, like the Maoist thing that has started doing, every time we say that 500 Maoists are killed. I said, how did you know that they are Maoists? Did the people who went to them, did they have known their language? Did they talk to them? Did they find out what happened? Therefore, the only solution, democratic solution, is that you must go to the people. And the people must have the power to decide. And that's a very long dream. And I think it is a continued fight from the day democracy started until today. And we have to continue it for several years more if we do not take a decision about that originally the people are the final ones.
Okay, thank you, Professor Patnaik. We have 1 more minute, so we could probably squeeze in a short comment or a question from anyone.
So with the permission of the chair, Professor Engineering Doctor, let me to say a few things here. Sir, it's me, Sally from Jadavpur University, Shumir Kormukar. Okay, so earlier I was there in International School of Dravidian Linguistics. Okay, and one of your student, I think Judhishthir Parida, he also used to be with us. Okay, so sir, you have rightly told that it seems that whatever problem that we do have in a country, in a multilingual country, that in most cases it seems to be mainly because of the very framework of nation and state. Okay, and another thing that we need also to say that though people are feeling that if their languages can go into the 8th schedule, their problem will be solved, they will have some better status, but that's definitely not the case, because many of them don't even know that English is not in the 8th schedule. It belongs to those 38 non-scheduled languages who are actually still struggling to put their name in the 8th schedule. So 8th schedule has nothing to do with status, or it will never ensure anything better to the people who are speaking those, say for example, the languages like Awadhi or Toto, Dhimal, that sort of thing. This is the one thing. And another point I have noticed in the comment box that Sir has written, that if in Switzerland we can have 4 different languages as the national language, then why it is not possible in case of India? But it seems to me it is it's again a bit problematic, mainly because of the reason that in a country like India, how many languages we do have, that in fact the people of the census department, they also don't know. It might be more than 1,600 languages we already have in a country like India, and if we are thinking that we will assign the status of the national language to all these languages, then it is definitely going to be a very big problem. So it's mainly a problem of the nation state framework that we have here. But only one thing, sir, I just want to know from you, and that's the last thing. So we have that 3-language policy, but many of the states actually they don't even follow it. Okay, and again in this national education policy draft 2020, they are again government is trying to promote it, but this time they are not putting some more emphasis particularly on the English or Hindi language. Okay, so they are only talking about the Indian language. So if you just as your concluding note, if you just give your view on this thing.
You see, whole question is, if we declare that all languages of India are national languages, then we solve the problem. There is no question of one or three national languages. We say that all the languages of India are national languages. Now, as far as communication language of the outside world is concerned, if you want to communicate with China, you have to study Chinese. If you want to go to Soviet Union, you have to study Russian. If you want to go to Australia, you have to study Australian English. If you have to go to England, you have to go to study British English. But British English also has destroyed Irish language, Welsh language, and Irish English and Welsh English are different from British English. Therefore, as far as communication language is concerned with what? If you today, South Africa is, sorry, not South Africa, but Japan, for example, they have risen high without studying English, studying Fuji Japanese language. So if we want to communicate with Japan, if we want to establish communication with them, we have to study Japanese. Therefore, the more languages you know, the better off you are. So many doors and windows are open to the world. Therefore, we live in a multilingual world, and we should declare our education to be a multilingual education. I studied Odia. I did my MA up to MA in Odia. But in the meantime, I also studied linguistics. I also studied French. I took a 3-year diploma in French while I was teaching at certificate. I studied Russian and German for 1 year while I was studying my linguistics at Pune. Therefore, I was in a better position for my PhD to pass through foreign languages. And other than that, also I was quite better off. When I went to Paris, I could speak in French. Therefore, you don't have to remember everything. I forgot. Whenever there is no use, you forget those. But that comes back to you as soon as you require it. Therefore, you should understand what language is. I ask people, what is mother tongue? Can you tell me what is the meaning of mother tongue? Nobody could tell me what mother tongue means. This is mother's language. I said in the present day world, if an American marries a Hindi or Malayalam speaker, what is the mother tongue? Would it be English, other tongue or mother tongue? Which would be the mother tongue? Therefore, you see, we have to understand that. I had a student who was Odia, who married a Tamil girl. They spoke English at home. So when the children grew, they had to grow up with 3 languages. All 3 of them are become their mother. Then both of them are working. Therefore they kept a Hindustani ayah to take care of the children. So she was another 4th language. Then they had a Gurkha security man. So he was the person, he was also taking care of children from their birth. So the children grew up with 5 languages, and they were in Bengal, they were living in Calcutta, therefore 6 languages were their mother. Therefore, we should not worry about the technical terms. We spend more time, we waste more time in talking about technical terms rather than doing this. See, bilingualism is something which the West accepted in 1961. The multilingualism is something which the West accepted in 2010. And the protagonist of bilingualism in the West, Wallace Lambert of Canada, he told me, he said, Patnaik, you have been abusing us. But what can we do? We have only middle-class white children in our classroom. Only when we are exposed to black and brown students, then only we found out what bilingualism is. That is how I propagated bilingualism, the entire West accepted it. So this is how things are developing. Instead of quarreling and fighting, instead of establishing individual right, I am the person who has done everything. If we can give up that and for once look at we, that we are all brothers and sisters, then we can decide in which language we will talk. We don't have to quarrel and fight. We don't have to beg somebody else to make a law for you to speak in this or that language. If we decide to speak among ourselves in this language, we speak. That's not wrong. And we must decide that there are no discriminatory laws which makes somebody better than the other.
Thank you, Professor Patnaik. On that positive note, and also, a very, very illuminating talk. Thank you so much for helping us learn so much, and thank you for being part of this conference as well.
Thank you very much.
Let me reiterate how grateful and honored we are to have Professor Patnaik among us. And I would like to thank our previous speakers, Radhika Punshi and David Jones as well, and also to Professor Datta for moderating the session. Our parallel sessions, contributing sessions have already started, session 12A and 12B. I'll be posting the links of the parallel sessions down in the chat box. We'll be meeting again in this meeting room at 5:15 p.m. where we have 3 keynote lectures delivered by Dr. Pradeep Nayak, Professor Pankaj Panwar, and Swami Sahajananda Giri Maharaj. I look forward to see all of you there. Thank you. I'll be posting the links in the chat box.